Okay. Yeah. Let's just say hello, everybody, again. This is in honor of. What was that noise? In honor of TorahAnytime.com. Again, we start 3 lines from the bottom of Pei Hey Amid Beis, and remember, we are our inquiry is what's the din where it's Mark is selling something to Marshall, and Marshall has his basket in Mark's property, in the seller's property. Can his basket acquire for him in the seller's property? But in order to resolve this, we go through a bunch of halachas. The first is Moshe Chamorav U'Po'alav, if Marshall pulls the donkeys, the donkey drivers, or the workers that have the apples that he's buying from Mark, he pulls the donkey driver or the workers that have it, and brings it into his house, that Meshicha on the donkey driver or on the worker doesn't help. So there, Bein Pasach Ad Shalei Madad, whether they made up a price, 10 apples for $5, they didn't measure it out, or Bein Madad Ad Shalei Pasach, and of course if they measured it out but they didn't make a price, Shneim Yichayim Lazben, both Mark and Marshall could back out. Pirkan, in the event that either of them, either Mark or Marshall, unloaded the fruit into Marshall's house, the buyer's house. So now he could acquire it because it's in his kotzer. So there, Pasak actually that if they made up a price, 10 apples for $5, even if they didn't measure how many apples they are, but they made up a price, now they both can't back out because Marshall acquires it by it sitting in his chotzer, in his house. Modad actually Pasak, if on the other hand, even if they measured out 50 apples, but they didn't come up with a price of how much is apples, then then they both could back out because, as we said, nobody is soimich das to clinch a deal until they make up a price. Now the Gemara assumes that when it says that Mark unloaded it into Marshall's house, it was still sitting in Mark's bags or in Mark's baskets. And yet we say that when he unloads it in the basket in Marshall's house, Marshall's property dominates over the basket, even though it's still Mark's basket, and Marshall acquires it. And when Mark's basket is in Marshall's house, Mark's basket doesn't dominate, but rather we say the property overwhelms it. So then it would be the same thing that Caleb the Lekeach Nami Berishus Meicher, when Marshall's basket is still in Mark's property, the Marshall's basket won't be able to dominate, and therefore he won't be able to acquire it, like Kana. So that's how we want to resolve it. We want to say that you see from over here that the property that it's in is stronger than the basket. And therefore, even if it's in Mark's basket, when it's, or Mark's sacks, but when it's in Marshall's property, Marshall could acquire it because his property supersedes is a better word, supersedes the basket. And then we could extrapolate from that our question, that therefore if Marshall, the buyer's basket, is in Mark's property will supersede the basket, and Marshall will not acquire it. Says the Gemara, Rav Nachman Yitzchak, no, it's no raya. When it says that Marshall acquires it, it's not talking about where it was still in Mark's sacks. It's talking about b'sheshavchan. It's talking about where Mark spilled out the apples onto Marshall's floor. So it's actually sitting in Marshall's property. So Ikbid Rava. So Rava was makbid. He said, how can you learn that? Does it say sheshafchan? Midei shafchan ketani? Does it say he spilled it out? That would be adding something that it doesn't say. Perkan ketani. It just says that he unloaded it, which implies he unloaded it while it was still in its sack. Says the Gemara, Alama Mabar Avashi, we could still learn that he put it on the floor. And we could explain why it doesn't say the extra step of shafchan. It's talking about b'misachle de tumei. It's talking about bundles of garlic. Tumei, tuf and shin are interchangeable in Aramaic, so it's shum. Shum is garlic. It's talking about bundles of garlic that are just tied together and are not in a sack. So there was no sack, and that's why it doesn't say sheshafchan. As we welcome in Richard Rosenzweig, who's joining us, it's nice to see 28 Zoomers here tonight with the coming of Moshe Lehman. And again, we want to welcome very much Itchy, and hope that Itchy now doesn't lose the code so that he'll be here every night. Itchy, maybe you should write it down in your Gemara. Now,
why is he not kind of it now that if it's not in the Kaler? Because they didn't decide on the price. Is that the case we're talking about?
The only time he's not kind is if it's madad v'loy pasak. So if he's madad v'loy pasak, he doesn't acquire it because they didn't make up a price and it's not semech das.
So that's the real reason why he's not coming.
In that case. In that case.
Well, isn't this the case we're talking about here?
No, we have a lot of cases here.
The one that would try to bring a raya.
Well, that's what it says. Pirkon v'chnisan l'sei beisai. What is it? Pasak actually madad. Ein shneim yichayim lazbem. Madad actually pasak. Shneim yichayim lazbem. Now, weiter. Amalei huna bereide marzutru l'avini. Amalei huna bereide marzutru l'avina. Michte pirkon kitani. If it was unloaded on the floor, Mali Posak, Mali Loy Posak. Marshall should acquire it. What's the difference if they made up a price or not? So the Gemara says, intelligent people. I know Marshall looks at me so strangely. Intelligent people do not clinch a deal until the price is made. Otherwise, who knows what's going to be claimed? Amalei Pasak, if they made a price, some kadate. Loi Pasak, loi some kadate. They don't rely on it and they don't clinch the deal, as I just told Rabbi Kranz. Now, Amalei Ravina Ravashi. So now the Gemara persists and tries to bring another proof. Whether, as we explained, if Marshall's basket is sitting in Mark's, the seller's property, could he acquire with it? So Amalei Ravino Ravashi, Tajma, the Rav and Shmuel Dimrei Travayu, Rav and Shmuel both say, Caleb shall Adam Kainulai Bekol Makam. A person's utensils acquire for him in all places. Now, doesn't that sounds pretty clear that it includes even in the seller's property? Lav la'asiyah rishus meicher. Isn't it come to include even if it's in the property of the seller? Says the Gemara, yes, but that's only in a specialized case. Where Mark says, zil kni, go and acquire it. If Mark says go and acquire it, then he cedes the area under the basket, and that's why it works. Says in Hasam Damalei Zil Kani, go and acquire. We're asking in a case where he says nothing. Tanan Hasam, we learned in Mesechtes Kedushin, Nechasim sheyesh lemachrais. Remember, we said property that has security, that's real estate. Real estate is niknin bekesef u'b'shtar u'b'chazak, is acquired with money. If the seller gives a deed of sale to the buyer, or if the buyer does an act of bailus, showing that he took hold of it, like locking the premises or putting up a fence. Property that is not secure, see, karka is considered secure because nobody's walking off with the karka. Right? If it's 16 Round Valley is not going anywhere. It's secure. But movables disappear. So v'she'ein la'hem achrayis, movables, ein niknin ela b'meshicha. It's only acquired when you pull it towards you. Now, actually, we know it's not acquired with money, but actually there are numerous kinyanim. There's hagva, picking it up. There's meshicha, pulling it. There's mesira, where the seller hands it over ritually to the buyer. Now, I'm going to give you a scoop over here. That when the Chachamim said you needed to make a kinyan, the number one kinyan is picking it up. That's why agva koina b'chol makam, even if it's in the rishus of the seller. But then they said if it's too heavy to pull, like a 100-pound sack of potatoes, so then you could be koina with meshicha, by pulling it. If it's really heavy, like Rich's yacht, so then you could acquire it with masira, by handing over the ropes of the boat to the buyer. So now let's see this inside. So she'ein la'hem achrayis, ein niknin ela b'meshicha. B'sura masnul Allah shmaitza mishmei Rav Chisda. In Surah they taught this dictum in the name of Rav Chisda, but Pumbedisa masnul mishmei Rav Kana. In Pumbedisa they taught it in the name of Rav Kana. V'imrula mishmei Rava. Loishanu, where do we say that you acquire with meshicha? That's eladvam she'ein darkan lagvia. That's a heavy sack of potatoes that the derech is not to pick it up. But that which is normally picked up, ba'agva, in only with picking it up, and meshicha. Ooh, that's an emphatic statement. That means if it's a light item, let's say Rich is buying a pocketbook for his wife, he can't acquire it meshicha, he has to make hagva. So the Gemara says, Yosef Abaya v'kamal Allah shmaitza. Abaya was sitting and saying over this dictum, Eisvei Ravada b'masnal Abaya. Now remember, before we learn this, remember there's halach of kam leibin rabmine. And that is if Chatzkel is going to forfeit his life by doing a capital crime, then if at the same time he became liable for monetary payment, he's exempt from the monetary payment. So, for example, if Chatzkel burns down a pile of grain on Shabbos, since he forfeits his life for burning, he's not chayiv to pay for the grain. However, we learned Tagoynev kis b'Shabbos. If Chatzkel steals a purse on Shabbos, chayiv. Why? Shekfar niskayev b'gneva. He already became chayiv in the gneva koydem sheyavel edei Yisur Shabbos, because as soon as he picked up the purse, he's chayiv to pay for the purse. He wasn't mechal Shabbos until he took it out of the house and did hoitzah. So since the chayiv, the monetary chayiv, came before the capital crime, he's chayiv to pay for the purse. However, you megara every yotzei, if he's schlepping the purse out, he didn't pick it up, he's pulling it out on the floor, then potter. Why? Because then the only time he acquires it with meshicha is when it gets outside the door. And when it gets outside the door, he did the capital crime of Haitzah, taking it out into the Rishus HaRabban. Shari Yisur Shabbos v'Gneva b'an ke'echon. And then we say, Kam Leibin Rabminei, because he forfeits his life for taking it out, he's potter from paying. Well, wait a second. So you say he schleps the purse out, he's kind of with Mashicha, but a purse is something you could pick up. And we said something you could pick up, you don't acquire with Mashicha. it's something that's easy to pick up. You still see you acquire it by pulling it. Amalei b'misna, it's talking about a purse that has straps. No, it's a pocketbook. So the Gemara says, well, I know, but nami b'misna ka'amina. We also assume it has straps. So what? It's still something you could pick up easily. A pocketbook you could pick up easily. So why you acquire it with Mashiach? Amalei, no, he says, I mean, memide de boy misna. It's a very heavy purse. It has in it 5,000 quarters. So you need to pull it by a rope. So that's something that is normal to acquire at Mashiach. Now you still could acquire it with Hagva, because Hagva kind of b'chol makam. But that's something that's hard to carry, so therefore you acquire it by picking it up. Okay, so far we're still safe. That's something that normally you pick up, you can't acquire with Mashiach. Tajma, we learned, B'shus Moicher, if the apples was in Mark's property, Loikona, Marshall doesn't acquire it, Achiyag Vienna, until he picks it up, or until he takes it out from Mark's property. Now, taking it out from Mark's property implies that he pulls it. Something that could be lifted up. If he wants, he could acquire it by picking it up. Rav Nachman Yitzchak says, no, it's not talking about the same case. Litstadin kitani. It's talking about two cases. It says either he picks it up if it's light, or he pulls it out if it's heavy. When it says either he picks it up, it means if it's light, he picks it up. If it's heavy, he could pull it out. Tajma, as we turn to pay Vav Amid Beis, Tajma, HaMoicher Peiris L'Chaveirai, if Mark sells fruit to Marshall, Moshach V'loi Madad, if Marshall pulls it, even if he didn't measure it, Kani. But wait a second, fruit, apples, is something that you could pick up. V'Peiris D'Bnei Hagva Ninu, and yet V'Ketani D'Kani B'Mashiach. Says, no, it's talking about, you think Marshall buys 10 apples? When does Marshall ever buy a little food? It's talking about when he's buying 100 apples. It says, a big sack. If so, one who buys flax from his friend, he only acquires it if he picks it up. The Gemara learns that since it changes its language and it doesn't say Moshe, here Yitaltenu means picking it up. Says the Gemara, shouldn't it be uniform? Doesn't that mean it's talking about flax that's in a big bundle, and yet it switches that you have to do Agva? Says the Gemara, Shani Pishtin, flax is different than Mishtamet. If it's in a big bundle, it would slip out. So they make it in small bundles. In small bundles, then you're supposed to do Agva. Amalei Ravina Ravashi, this is another teaching from Masechtas Kedushin. Tajma, Behema Gasa, a large livestock, like a cow, Niknis b'Masira. Mark will sell it to Marshall, and Marshall will acquire it when Mark hands over the reins to Marshall. Vadaka, small livestock, like a sheep, Bagva, by picking it up. Divrei Meir. Even small livestock is acquired by pulling it. Well, now the Gemara asks, but why? Small livestock you could pick up. It's something you could pick up. And it says that he acquires it by pulling it. Says, you know why? Because small animals, when you try to pick them up, they claw on the earth. And it's hard to pick them up. So therefore we allow Mashicha. Says the Gemara, Shani Behema, even the small livestock, the Sircha, it claws on the ground. So now, another teaching. Rav and Shmuel, the Imrei Travayu, Rav and Shmuel both say, Kur b'shloishim ani meichelach. If Mark says, I'm selling you a kur for 30 selah, Yochel Lazabai, they could back out. He says a kur for 30 shkalim. So either of them could back out afilu b'sa achroin, even by the last saw. Why? Because Mark needs the 30 shkalim, and therefore he is not going to agree to a partial sale. And therefore, he's only Saimich Das when Mark takes the full delivery, when Marshall takes the full delivery. Because he said, I'm selling you a kur for 30 shkalim. So until the full amount is delivered, either side could back out. But if he says, kur b'shleishim sah, I'm selling you a kur for 30 shkalim. Kur b'shleishim, I'm selling you a kur for 30 saw b'sela. I'm selling you each saw for a shekel. So here he makes it that it's like it's 30 deals. Because he repeated a saw for a shekel. Rishon kana. As soon as he measured him out a saw, that's binding. That's not retractable. Now the Gemara says, Toshma, where we said if Mark measures it out into Marshall's basket, Rishon kana, he acquires every bit that Mark puts in, he acquires it right away. Now that implies, even though he didn't fill it to the top yet, in what they agreed, but we said that it's not binding until the whole thing is delivered. Says, well, no, that's talking about Kigain de Amalei, where Mark told Marshall, I'm selling you a hin. Now a hin is a liquid measure of 12 lug. So he tells him, hin b'shnayim asaslam, I'm selling you a hin for 12 shekel. Lug b'sela. Each lug a shekel. Now again, he used the superfluous language to say that every lug is a separate deal. And it's talking about where Marshall's basket, his measuring vessel, has teeth, has indentation, 1 lug, 2 lug, 3 lug, like you have when you buy Benadryl, and they give you that plastic cup, and it has the measures on the side, how many millimeters it is, or whatever. Says what? Milliliters. Says the Gemara. So here it's talking about where Marshall's container was a hin container, and it had marks. 1 lug, 2 lug, 3 lug. It had teeth. So here it's talking about if he tells Marshall, I'm selling you a kur, which is 30 saw for 30 shkalim, each saw for a shekel, and it has the indentations, 1 saw, 2 saw, 3 saw, so each saw is a separate sale, and that's why Marshall acquires it. Okay, so first of all, I did the Mishnah Yomis already, because I'm going to do now a fantastic for the Shabbos table.